Arthur won't release him without Tudric's agreement, so it won't happen yet. But when it does, Derval, I'll kill Gunglius."
She spoke with the terrible simplicity of truth, and I thought how ferocity gave her a beauty that nature had denied her. She was staring across the wet, cold land towards the distant mound of Caer Cadern.
"Arthur," she said, "dreams of peace. But there never will be peace. Never. Britain is a cauldron, Derval, and Arthur will stir it to horror."
"You're wrong," I said loyally. Nimue mocked that assertion with a grimace, and then, without another word, she turned and walked back down the path towards the warriors' huts. I pushed through the petitioners into the villa. Arthur glanced up as I came in, waved a casual welcome, then returned his attention to a man who was complaining that his neighbour had moved their boundary stones. Bedwin and Geraint sat at the table with Arthur, while to one side Agricola and Prince Tristan stood like guards. A number of the kingdom's councillors and magistrates sat on the floor, which was curiously warm, thanks to the Roman way of making a space beneath that could be filled with warm, smoky air from a furnace. A crack in the tiles was allowing wisps of the smoke to drift across the big chamber. The petitioners were seen one by one, and justice was pronounced. Almost all of the cases could have been dealt with in Lindinis's magistrates' court, that stood just 100 paces from the villa. But many folk, especially the pagan country dwellers, reckoned that a decision given in royal council was more binding than a judgment made in a court established by the Romans, and so they stored their grudges and feuds until the council was conveniently close by. Arthur, representing the baby Mordred, dealt with them patiently, but he was relieved when the real business of the day could commence. That business was to dispose of the tangled ends left by the previous day's fight. Owain's warriors were given to Prince Geraint, with Arthur's recommendation that they be split between various troops. One of Geraint's captains, a man called Claewach, was appointed in Owain's place as the new commander of the King's Guard. Then a magistrate was given the task of tallying Owain's wealth and sending to Kurnow the portion that was owed in Sahid. I noted how brusquely Arthur conducted the business, though never without giving each man present a chance to speak his mind. Such consultation could lead to interminable argument, but Arthur had the happy talent of understanding complicated matters swiftly and proposing compromises that pleased everyone. I noticed, too, how Geraint and Bedwin were content to let Arthur take the first place. Bedwin had placed all his hopes for Dumnonia's future on Arthur's sword, and Bedwin was thus Arthur's strongest supporter, while Geraint, who was Uther's nephew, could have been an opponent. But the prince had none of his uncle's ambition, and was happy that Arthur was willing to take the responsibility of government. Dumnonia had a new king's champion, Arthur ab Uther, and the relief in the room was palpable. Prince Kudui of Isker was ordered to contribute to the Sahid owed to Kurnow. He protested against the decision, but quailed before Arthur's anger, and meekly agreed to pay 1/4 of Kurnow's price. Arthur, I suspect, would have preferred to inflict a sterner punishment, but I was oath-bound not to reveal Kudui's part in the attack on the moor, and there was no other evidence of his complicity, so Kudui escaped a heavier judgment. Prince Tristan acknowledged Arthur's decisions with a nod of his head. The next business of the day was arranging the future of our king. Mordred had been living in Owain's household, and now he needed a new home. Bedwin proposed a man named Nabur, who was the chief magistrate in Durnovaria. Another councillor immediately protested, condemning Nabur for being a Christian. Arthur rapped on the table to end a bitter argument before it began. "Is Nabur here?" he demanded. A tall man stood at the back of the room. "I'm Nabur." He was clean-shaven and dressed in a Roman toga. Nabur ap Llwyd, he introduced himself formally. He was a young man, with a narrow, grave face and receding hair that gave him the appearance of a bishop or a druid. "You have children, Nabur?" Arthur asked. "3 living, Lord. 2 boys and a girl. The girl is our Lord Mordred's age." "And is there a druid, or bard, in Durnavaria?" Nabur nodded. "Durella the bard, Lord." Arthur spoke privately with Bedwin, who nodded. Then Arthur smiled at Nabur. "Would you take the king into your care?" "Gladly, Lord." "You may teach him your religion, Nabur ap Llwyd, but only when Durella is present. And Durella must become the boy's tutor when he is 5 years of age. You will receive half a king's allowance from the treasury, and will be required to keep 20 guards about our Lord Mordred at all times. The price of his life is your soul, and the souls of your whole family. Do you agree?" Nabur blanched when he was told that his wife and children would die if he let Mordred be killed, but he still nodded acceptance. And no wonder. To be the king's guardian gave Nabur a place very close to the centre of Dumnonia's power. "I agree, Lord," he said. The last business of the council was the fate of Ladwys, Gunlius's wife and lover, and slave to Owain. She was brought into the room where she stood defiantly in front of Arthur. "This day," Arthur told her, "I ride north to Corinium, where your husband is our captive. Do you wish to come?"
"So you can humiliate me further?" Ladwys asked.
Owain, for all his brutality, had never managed to break her spirit. Arthur frowned at her hostile tone. "So you can be with him, lady," he said gently. "Your husband's imprisonment is not harsh. He has a house like this, though admittedly it is guarded. But you may live with him in privacy and peace, if that is what you want." Tears showed at Ladwys's eyes.
"He may not want me. I've been soiled."
Arthur shrugged. "I can't speak for Gunlius. I just want your decision. If you choose to stay here, then you may. Owain's death means you are free." She seemed bemused by Arthur's generosity, but managed to nod.
"I will come, Lord."
"Good." Arthur stood and carried his chair to the side of the room, where he courteously invited Ladwys to sit. Then he faced the assembled councillors, spearmen, and chiefs. "I have one thing to say. Just one. But you must all understand this one thing, and you must repeat it to your men, your families, your tribes, and your septs. Our king is Mordred. No one but Mordred. And it is to Mordred we owe our allegiance and our swords. But in the next years the kingdom will face enemies, as all kingdoms do, and there will be a need, as there always is, for strong decisions. And when those decisions are taken, there will be men among you who will whisper that I am usurping the king's power. You will even be tempted to think I want the king's power. So in front of you now, and in front of our friends from Gwent and Kurnow—" Here Arthur gestured courteously towards Agricola and Tristan. "Let me swear upon whatever oath you hold most dear, that I shall use the power you give me for one end only. And that one end is to see Mordred take his kingdom from me when he is of age. That I swear." He stopped abruptly. There was a stir in the room. Until that moment, no one had fully understood how swiftly Arthur had taken power in Dumnonia. The fact that he sat at the table with Bedwin and Prince Geraint suggested that the 3 men were equals in power. But Arthur's speech proclaimed that there was only one man in charge, and Bedwin and Geraint, by their silence, gave support to Arthur's claim. Neither Bedwin nor Geraint were stripped of their power, but rather they now exercised it at Arthur's pleasure. and his pleasure decreed that Bedwin would stay to be the arbiter of disputes within the kingdom. Geraint would guard the Saxon frontier, while Arthur went north to face the forces of Powys. I knew, and maybe Bedwin knew, that Arthur had high hopes of peace with Gorfythid's kingdom. But until that peace was agreed, he would continue a posture of war. A large party went north that afternoon. Arthur, with his 2 warriors and his servant, Hygwith, rode ahead with Agricola and his men. Morgan, Ladwis, and Luned rode in a cart, while I walked with Nimue. Luned was subdued, overwhelmed by Nimue's anger. We spent the night at the Tor, where I saw the good work Gwilithin was doing. The new stockade was in place, and a new tower rising on the foundations of the old. Ralla was pregnant. Pellinore did not know me, but just walked about his new cage as though he was on guard, and barked orders at unseen spearmen. Druiden ogled Ladwis. Godovan, the clerk, showed me Howl's grave north of the Tor, then took Arthur to the shrine of the Holy Thorn, where Saint Norwenna was buried close beside the miraculous tree. Next morning I said farewell to Morgan and to Nimue. The sky was blue again, the wind was cold, and I went north with Arthur. In the spring my son was born. He died 3 days later. For days afterwards I would see that small, wrinkled red face, and tears would come to my eyes at the memory. He had seemed healthy, but one morning, hung in his swaddling clothes on the wall of the kitchen so he would be out of the way of the dogs and piglets, he simply died. Luned, like me, wept, but she also blamed me for her baby's death, saying the air at Corinium was pestilential, though she was in fact happy enough in the town. She liked the clean Roman buildings and her small brick house that faced onto a stone-paved street, and she had struck up an unlikely friendship with Eileen, Arthur's lover, and with Eileen's twin sons, Amhar and Loholt. I liked Eileen well enough, but the 2 boys were fiends. Arthur indulged them, perhaps because he felt guilty that they, like him, were not proper sons born to inherit, but bastards who would need to make their own way in a hard world. They received no discipline that I ever saw, except once when I found them prying at a puppy's eyes with a knife, and I struck them both hard. The puppy was blinded, and I did the merciful thing of killing it quickly. Arthur sympathized with me, but said it was not my place to strike his boys. His warriors applauded me, and Eileen, I think, approved. She was a sad woman. She knew her days as Arthur's companion were numbered, for her man had become the effective ruler of Britain's strongest kingdom, and he would need to marry a bride who could buttress his power. I knew that bride was Cynwyn, star and princess of Powys, and I suspect Eileen knew it too. She wanted to return to Benowick, but Arthur would not allow his precious sons to leave the country. Eileen knew that Arthur would never let her starve, but nor would he disgrace his royal wife by keeping his lover close. As the spring put leaves on trees and spread blossom across the land, her sadness deepened. The Saxons attacked in the spring, but Arthur did not go to war. King Melwus defended the southern border from his capital at Venter, while Prince Geraint's warbands sallied out of Duroc Brevis to oppose the Saxon levies of the dreaded King Ael. Geraint had the harder time of it, and Arthur reinforced him by sending him Sagramor with 30 horsemen, and Sagramor's intervention tipped the balance in our favour. Ael's Saxons, we were told, believed Sagramor's black face made him a monster sent from the kingdom of the night, and they had neither the sorcerers nor the swords that could oppose him.